My name is Nate Arnold, and Scott came over here this morning to kind of hear a little bit about me, my life, and so on. And we will attempt to make a little bit of a video here for you. The story actually begins with my great-great-grandparents over in what is now Lithuania. It was the Litvishir region, the Litvak region, Lithuanian region of Russia at the time. And I don't have records of when they came to this country. Their names were Hirsch and Leah Saglovitz. And they changed it to Harris and Lena. How they got those names, well, was close, I guess. And why did they come to Cleveland? Well, they had friends, relatives. Somebody living in Cleveland was making a living. At the time, Cleveland was a very small town, probably about 20,000 people. And there were really no Jews here. There were a few. They even had a congregation at the time that they came. And they came here. I don't know exactly what Hirsch did, but there are stories that he worked at the Schwitz. Now, a Schwitz is a bathhouse. Schwitz literally means to perspire. But he worked in the local bathhouse downtown. People did not have plumbing. They didn't have bathrooms. So they'd go once a week. Men would go to a bathhouse, and they would get a shower and go bathing in there. But the main reason they went was they had steam rooms. I was fortunate enough one time to have gone to an old-fashioned Schwitz, and it was quite interesting. You walk into a room, and there were rows of like a theater. And the higher you got in the row, the hotter it was. And down at the bottom was a barrel with hot coals in it. They'd throw water on the hot coals, and it would steam. And you'd get this steam, and you'd feel great. It would really perspire, get all the sins out of you. And at the very top of the auditorium, so to speak, was a man who was referred to as the Platzik. Platzik literally means shoulder. But the Platzik gave you a rub down, and they would massage real deep. And they would take grape leaves. They would soap up grape leaves with liquid soap, and they'd slap you across the back with it and rub in the soap. And then they'd take cold water and spray it on you in this hot room. And it was we called it a machaya, which means wonderful in Yiddish. I'll use a lot of Yiddish words as we go through this thing. And I'm sorry if I confuse anybody with them. My Yiddish is not the best, but I do understand a little bit. But anyway, Hirsch had a number of sons who, many of them stayed in Cleveland. And one son, his name was Louis Saglovitz, and he married a woman named Rose Sharp. So Louis and Rose settled in Cleveland, and somehow Louis got into the excavating business. Now, it's very important what he did for a living. He went out and dug holes to build buildings. And they used, in those days, they didn't have big equipment, so they used bulls and cows and so on to pull the plows and dig with. And his wife, Rose, was a very dominant person. She had a very dominant personality, and she lived a long and full life. In fact, she was alive at my bar mitzvah. But Louis had 3 sons and a daughter, and all of the family came into the family business, into the excavating business, and somehow, right after they started in business, they were called upon to wreck a building. There was a house. Somebody wanted to build a new building, and they wanted the house torn down, and the people that did that were excavators. So they took their excavating equipment, and they went and they wrecked the house. And evidently, Louis found out that was a decent business to be in. First of all, you could tear down a house and save things. You could save the windows, the doors, any of the plumbing appliances and so on, and resell them. So he went into a new business. He called it Cuyahoga Wrecking and Material Company. Now, the material end was basically a lumber yard. Bought some property at 63rd Kinsman, and he hired a couple of people to come and work for him, and he employed his sons. His sons' names were Nathan, George, and Sam, and the daughter was Tilly. Now, Nathan was the one who became my grandfather, and he was a hard-working guy. Cuyahoga Wrecking Company was actually incorporated as a business in 1897. Nathan married a woman named Anna Cohn, spelled Kohn. If it was spelled with a K, it meant they came from Hungary, and she came from Austria-Hungary with her family of about 10 or 11 children, and they have two daughters, Hilda and Shirley. Hilda was born in 1915, and Shirley was born in 1917, and they lived in front of the wrecking yard. They had this big open yard where they stored lumber from wrecking projects, lumber and building materials, bricks. They used to take bricks, they'd smash them out of a building, and they would knock off the concrete that held them together and clean them up and stack them and resell them as a source for the facade of buildings. But anyway, they got a very big project, probably the biggest project of the time, in 1921. Down on 6th and Superior was a big 6-story building. It was a Masonic temple. Had a big auditorium there, offices and meeting rooms for the Masonic organization. And the federal government had purchased the building and land to build a new Federal Reserve Bank. And they hired Cuyahoga Wrecking Company to tear down the building. When they got in there to tear it down, they took the first floor of the building, and they actually made like a store where they stacked up the doors and the windows, and they would take the windows out so they could save the whole thing, the framing and everything. And windows in those days had counterweights made out of lead that you could lift the window very easily. It was counterweighted, and it was heavy glass windows, but they were quite valuable to save the whole system with the lead weights and so on. And they had the whole first floor of the Masonic Hall was a store for selling used equipment out of the wrecking job. Well, one day they were there. They had already taken down at least one floor. I think they were on the 5th floor or the 4th floor, and they were wrecking. And 12 o'clock, they blew a whistle, and it was time for lunch. So the men all came out, and they went next door where they could sit down and eat their lunch. But Nathan, who was in charge of the wrecking job, stayed there with one of the foremen in the office, and they were totaling up what kind of sales they had for that morning. And a terrible tragedy occurred. They had weakened some of the walls on the 5th floor with the idea of pulling them over, getting out of the way, pulling them over, and letting them go down to the 1st floor. They would cut a hole and haul the debris away. And all of a sudden, the building started to shake. And we don't know if there was a wind or what. But the top floor caved in on the floor and went right down through the various floors. And the next floor came in, and just like you would implode a building, the whole building imploded and fell down. And the two men that were on the bottom floor, my grandfather Nathan and this other employee, were both killed instantly in this tragedy. And the building, within 10 minutes, was a big pile of rubble. And Sam, one of the brothers, was racing through the debris and hollering out to his brother, who he could hear moaning. He was pretty crippled up. He was shouting out, "Nate, stay alive, Nate. I'm coming for you, I'm coming for you." But unfortunately, by the time he got to Nate, Nate was already dead. They pulled him out of the rubble. 29 years old. Nice, virile guy, tall. He was about 6 foot tall, very strapping person. They say in many ways that I look a lot like he looked. My mother was 6 years old at the time, and my Aunt Shirley was 4 years old. And they dug him out, and he was buried. And the family, as families did in those days, they took care of of their relatives, especially if somebody had died. So they went to my grandmother, Anna, and they offered to take care of her as best they could. They didn't have insurance per se, but they said that they would care for her and help her children and so on. And here she was, a young widow. She was probably 26, 27 years old with two small daughters and left to fare for herself in the busy city of Cleveland, Ohio, 1921. Nathan was buried in Lansing Cemetery. My mother was going to school in the city of Cleveland, and eventually, somewhere in the late 20s, they were called upon, Cuyahoga Wrecking was called upon to wreck a mansion that was located at 110th and St. Clair. It was owned by the Humphrey family. The Humphrey family owned an amusement park called Euclid Beach, and they were a wealthy family. They owned this mansion, small mansion, and they wanted it torn down. They had sold the property. I think they were going to build a gas station or something. So Cuyahoga Wrecking Company went and bid on wrecking this mansion, and somehow they turned it into a situation where they were able to save the entire building. And something new on the scene was house moving. And they bought an adjacent piece of property on 110th Street, about 50 feet away from where the building was, and using railroad jacks, they were able to jack up the whole building and were able to slide rollers underneath it. It was a bit of an engineering project, but they moved the building around to 110th Street, and because they were in the lumber business, lumber was free to them. They had a couple of their guys from the lumber yard come out and remodel the interior of the building, and they made this mansion into a 4-family house. And there were 4 apartments, 2 on the second floor and 2 on the first floor. And it was there that they somehow gave the building to my grandmother, Anna Sog, as an investment property so she could get some income and a place to raise her daughters. And they took care of the 2 daughters. I know that they got the daughters into the old Euclid Avenue Temple so they would get a Jewish education. And they were raised in this house on 110th Street. And I believe that my grandmother had one of the suites, and they rented out 2 suites. So they had their living facilities taken care of by Cuyahoga Wrecking Company. And the family really looked out for the widow and her 2 daughters. The company became very successful, and they eventually opened a branch office in Buffalo, New York. And they sent the daughter and her husband, the daughter's name was Tilly, and she married a guy named Al Yazanowski. And Tilly and Al moved to Buffalo and established Cuyahoga Wrecking Company of Buffalo. And eventually they hired Al's brother, Sal, who went to Baltimore, Maryland, and started Cuyahoga Wrecking Company of Maryland. Eventually, they opened up in Detroit and sent Tilly's son-in-law, it was Tilly's son-in-law, to Detroit to run that operation. And all the various operations of Cuyahoga Wrecking Company, wherever they had a project, were all run by a member of the family. So many of the family were in and out of the wrecking business through the 1920s, 1930s. So we're going to fast forward up to approximately 1934 when an affiliated company, it wasn't Cuyahoga Wrecking Company, but it was a break-off, and a cousin, Irving Sog, was in charge of this wrecking job in Indianapolis, Indiana. Now, I have to backtrack just slightly. In 1913, Irving Arnold was born. He was the son of Louis and Sarah Arnold. Now, Louis and Sarah met in Cleveland. Louis came from Poltava in Russia, and Sarah's family came from Berdichev. But Sarah was like 2 or 3 years old when she came to this country. Louis came as a young man, and it was kind of a funny story. In Yiddish, they had what was called a shidduch. A shidduch is an arranged marriage. So in order to get Louis out of Russia and bring him to Cleveland, they had to have a bride for him. So they found a woman in Cleveland who was from Poltava, and they fixed him up with Louis, who came at age, I think it was 18 or 19 years old. He came to the new country to marry a woman. Her name was Fanny. And they evidently wrote letters and so on. They knew when he would arrive in New York. He arrived in New York and stayed in New York like 12 hours and caught a train for Cleveland. And Fanny goes down to the railroad station to meet her intended bridegroom. And she brings along her real good friend, Sarah. Sarah was her best girlfriend. The two girls, young girls, 18, 19 years old, go down to the train station, and off the train comes this guy who, in his 12 hours in New York, bought a white shirt and a crisp tie and a jacket. He looked like a real Yankee Doodle dandy, and he gets off, speaks no English, only Russian and Yiddish. And he meets Fanny, and nice to meet you and all that, and he meets Sarah, and he goes, wow. Well, I don't know if he went wow, but falls in love with Sarah. And even up till I was a teenager, Sarah remained friends with Fanny. And she became Fanny Rosen. And I remember driving my grandmother over to visit Fanny Rosen, her good friend. I didn't learn until later that she had married Fanny's intended. Okay, so they come to Cleveland.
Hang on.
Came when he was 18 or 19 years old.
Okay.
To escape from being in the Tsar's army.
Okay. So also, who owned Cuyahoga Wrecking? Who's the actual owner?
The owners of Cuyahoga Wrecking were the Soglovitz family, which was my mother's family. Now, her father had been killed on a wrecking project.
Okay. I
So
wasn't getting your mother is the Cuyahoga Wrecking.
Cuyahoga Wrecking Company
And your dad is
comes in.
grandfather is, yeah.
My grandfather comes here. He was a tailor in Russia, so became a tailor in Cleveland, and had 5 children. There was Jeanette, Henry, Irving was the middle child, Howard, and Adeline. So 3 boys and 2 girls. And he raised them. They lived at 38th and Woodland. And they were, of course, immigrants. And now we fast forwarded to about 1936. And Irving is 21 years old. And in Indianapolis, Indiana, is an Irving Soglovitz. And he is wrecking a big hotel in downtown Indianapolis. Irving Sog was married to a woman named Minnie. And Minnie had cousins in Indianapolis whose name was Arnold. So he had cousins, or she had cousins in Indianapolis, and he has a wrecking project that will take 9 months. It was big enough that he goes and he rents an apartment to live in. And she's in touch with her family. She finds out that her family has these 2 boys, and Irving has this cousin in Cleveland named Hilda Soglovitz, and somewhere in I believe it was in the 1930s, they changed their name, shortened the name from Soglovitz to Sog. And Hilda had gone to Glenville High School, this is where all the Jewish people went to school in Cleveland, and she was a typical Cleveland Jewish girl. And she comes down to visit Irving and Minnie Sog in Indianapolis for a little visit. And they want to fix her up on a date. So Minnie calls her cousin Sarah, and their name had been changed to Arnold. It was originally Aronovitz in the old country. It was Aronovitz. And actually, Louis's parents came here, Hillel and Sonia. They were able to get them out of Russia, and they were living in Cleveland. But I think they had, by 1936, they had already died. Okay, so Hilda comes down to Indianapolis on the train, and they fix her up with Henry Arnold. Now, Henry Arnold, my Uncle Henry, was a great guy, but he was also a conniver. And he figures, well, if it's my mother's cousin, and they want to fix me up with her, and she's 21 years old, or 19 years old, and she's not married. She's got to be a dog. So he gets his little brother Irving, brings Irving in, says, "I tell you what, Irv, she doesn't know either one of us. You're going to go in my place on the blind date. I'll give you $2. Wow. Irving says, "Wow, I get my $2 and it'd be great." So he takes the date. He goes to their apartment, to Minnie and Irving's apartment. He walks in, and here's this doll of a woman. Good looking. Well, I say in good common language, a good looking broad. And he says, "Wow." And he takes her out on a date, takes her for dinner, and takes her to someplace to go dancing. And the two of them love to dance together. And it was like love at first sight for the two of them. So they went out while she stayed in Indianapolis. They went out 3 or 4 times and got rather friendly. And she goes back to Cleveland. And the following week, Irving takes the train after work. He leaves work on a Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock, catches the 6 o'clock train to Cleveland, arrives in Cleveland at 6 o'clock the next morning. And he goes and they had places in the train terminal where you could clean up. So you could go in and take a shower and get dressed. And he comes out and he picks up Hilda and they go out on a date for the weekend. And Sunday afternoon he catches the train, goes back to Indianapolis and goes to work. This went on for about 6 months. And, of course, they fell in love. And he was working in a clothing store in Indianapolis. It was a job, nothing special. He wasn't particularly skilled at it, but he knew the garment industry. The family had a family business. They made hats and caps. And Lewis's brother, Sam Arnold, was the owner of the company. And my grandfather, Lewis, had come there to be the foreman in the garment factory. So my father didn't see much of a future in working for that family business. And now he's in love with this good-looking girl up in Cleveland, which is where he was born, and he has some relatives in Cleveland. So he takes a big step. He goes in and he quits his job at the store in Indianapolis and moves to Cleveland so that he can eventually get married to this Hilda Sog. Well, Irving, when he was about 19 or 20, got a short haircut, and it never grew back. In fact, it all fell out. So he was bald-headed and very thin, and he looked like he was about 35. Well, the Sog family had a fit. Here's Hilda, and she wants to marry this old man from Indianapolis. And I remember them saying, my grandmother, Anna Sog, "How can you go with this old bald-headed guy?" No, he's really a nice guy. Well, the story is such that he marries her. So he's got to have a place to live, and so they give him an apartment on 110th Street. By this time, Anna, my grandmother, moves out, and she moves in with her younger daughter, Shirley, who had just gotten married. And Shirley took my grandmother into their house.
Shirley Sog?
Her name was Shirley Sog.
Who did she marry?
Painter, P-A-Y-N-E.
My cousin.
Oh,
Maury
see?
Painter?
Maury Painter.
I knew we were related once I heard Sog.
Yeah.
Hilarious. I'll show you the family tree and how it
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
It's a small world.
Oh my
Yes,
God, yeah.
she was married to Morris Painter, who they call Pinchy.
Pinchevsky.
Yeah, from Pinchevsky. Absolutely right. Absolutely right. And that was my aunt, my mother's younger sister, by 2 years. So they really grew up together, just like Seth and Andrew. They were almost that same ilk. They had all the same friends and so on at Glenville. And but my grandmother moved in with them when they first got married and lived with them until she died. Believe it or not, she stayed in their house. So they had an apartment. You give Irving an apartment and Hilda. They lived there. And it was during the Depression. So it's 1936 they got married. And things are kind of rough. And Irving he went and he bought a dry cleaning store at a few dollars, and he mortgaged everything, bought this dry cleaning store, Whiteway Cleaners on 79th and St. Clair. And he would operate the dry cleaning store and eventually went broke in it, lost it all. And they had something called WPA, the Works Something Administration, where you could get welfare money, but you had to work. The government had jobs for people, and they were menial jobs, but if the government was going to give you unemployment compensation, you had to work. So Irving had to work. But what was he? A ditch digger. He was out digging ditches for laying the new sewer system that would go around the city of Cleveland. And so they were very happy. He was working, he was making money, and Hilda becomes pregnant with me. And they're living in this house on 110th Street. And let's see, Grandma Sog, who was Rose Sog, that was Louis Sog's wife. Louis Sog had already died, and she used to come down to the wrecking yard, and she was running the wrecking company. I mean, our family was women's livers long before it was popular. So she was a very dynamic woman, very strong woman, and she was running the wrecking company. Now we forward to December 1937, and on December 23rd, just before Christmas, Irving had gotten a job working for Bill's Clothes at 152nd and St. Clair, selling clothes. And this is the height of their season. It's just 2 days before Christmas, and their store is going bonkers. And Irving's wife is pregnant out to here, and he has to take her over to St. Luke's Hospital. Takes her to St. Luke's Hospital, and a cousin, his name was Aaron B. Yazanowski. And Aaron Yazanow, for some reason they called him B. That was his middle initial. And they called him Dr. B. Well, Dr. B was affiliated with St. Luke's Hospital, of all things. And he tells Irving, go home. She ain't going to have the baby for another 2 days. In fact, take her home. It's false labor. So he takes Hilda home, and she's still yelling that, it's happening. Takes her back to the St. Luke's Hospital, and Dr. B comes out and says, it ain't going to happen today. Go home. So he goes home, and then he goes to work on December 24th. And it was a Friday, and it was the biggest day of the year. They expected to really sell stuff. And Hilda goes into labor full-time. She's big-time labor, and they call the store. They find Irving. Irving, come on over. She's going to have the baby at any time. So my father has to go in and tell Bill Lippman, I ain't going to work today. My wife's having a baby today. But I know I owe it to you to work here. So what do you want me to do? So Bill Lippman's wife, who was running the store, her name was Gert. Gert Lippman says to my father, go. You go to the hospital, you got to be with your wife. So he goes to St. Luke's Hospital, 10:10 in the morning. Here I am, day before Christmas, December 24th. I've led my entire life with that same question every time they ask me my birthday. What's your birthday? December 24th. Oh, you're a Christmas baby. No, I'm not a Christmas baby. I'm Jewish. I don't celebrate Christmas. Oh, I said, but I was a Christmas present for my parents. So I'm born, and I think my father went back to Bill's Clothes and worked the rest of the day. He's a new father and all excited and everything. Next morning, Christmas Day, St. Luke's Hospital is a Methodist hospital, and they take all the nurses and they dress them up with wings, and they're carrying a candle, each one, and they're going through the wards with a lighted candle, singing Christmas carols. And Hilda wakes up. In those days, they put the woman to sleep to have the baby. She slept through the whole thing. And she wakes up on Christmas Day, and there's 6 angels. She thought there were 6 nurses standing at the foot of her bed, holding candles and singing hymns. Thought she died and went to heaven. She couldn't believe she was still alive. Thought she was in heaven. So here's this little baby. And of course, what are they going to name him? They're going to name him after her father. So I'm named after my grandfather, who was killed on the wrecking job. And his name was Nathan. And they, on the 8th day, whatever it was, right there in the hospital, they had the bris, the circumcision. My father talks about the circumcision. He's standing there, and the rabbi who was, it wasn't a rabbi, it was a cantor. Cantor Rickel is in there doing his business on me. My father gets a little bit lightheaded. And he says, I better get out of here. And he walks out of the room, and he sits down in a chair. He's not on the chair 5 minutes when my grandfather, Louis Arnold, comes walking out of the room, and he sits down in the chair, puts his head between his legs. The two of them are like this. And they're carving up this little kid. Anyway, they did a good job, and thank goodness. And I go home to 110th Street. And my father gets laid off from Bell's Close right after the Christmas holidays. He gets laid off. They didn't have a job for him anymore. What does he do? He goes back on relief, and he becomes a ditch digger again. And he's out digging ditches. Now, Rose Soglovitz, who is the great-grandmother of this baby, my great-grandmother, her granddaughter has just given birth to her great-grandson. And what does the great-grandson's father do? He digs ditches. And this didn't exactly go over well with the family. And I could just picture it to this day. She calls up Uncle George, my great-uncle, who was Nathan's brother. And he is now running the wrecking company. And she says, in her typical Yiddish dialect, George, give Irving a job. Give him a job at the Cuyahoga. She used to call it the Cuyahoga. Well, I didn't know whether she was talking about the river or the wrecking company. But give Irving a job at the Cuyahoga. So, under duress, George gives Irving a job at the wrecking yard, the lowest job he could possibly find for him. And that was going around. They had this big area where they took lumber from the wrecking jobs, brought it in, and you took a crowbar, you pulled out the nails. Pulled all the nails out of the lumber, and then you would measure the lumber, stack it, and they had a magnet that they rolled. They rolled it through the yard, picked up the twisted nails, put them in a barrel, and sold them for scrap iron. It was a source of income.
After straightening them out with a hammer, I'm sure.
Well, some of them, if they could, they did, and the rest they sold as scrap. And this was a job for Irving. But he didn't complain. He had a job, and it was better than digging ditches. It was one step above a ditch digger. Meantime, Hilda's at home and with the baby, me. And he's working there at the wrecking company, and they promote him. He becomes a salesman. He's selling lumber. And Uncle Al Yazanow, who was our doctor's brother, had married my grandfather's sister. So the Yazanow family are now related to us. And Al Yazanow had moved to Buffalo to start Cuyahoga Wrecking Company of Buffalo. And he needed some people there. So Uncle George comes and says, Irving, we're going to promote you. We want to move you to Buffalo. You take your wife and the baby, you're going to move to Buffalo, and you're going to work for Uncle Al. So he does. And he gives up his suite in the apartment, and he moves to Buffalo, and I'm a little baby. And we lived with Uncle Al and Aunt Tilly for the first 6 months or a year. We lived with them there. And Uncle Al, he wasn't exactly an alcoholic, but every night after dinner, he would go down to the basement and open a can of beer and his bottle of schnapps and make a Boilermaker. Come on, Irving. They were feeding my parents. Aunt Tilly took care of him, and they fed him and everything. So then after dinner, they had to go downstairs, down to the basement with Uncle Al, and get sugared up a little bit. It's their job. Okay, so he goes to work for him, and he does a nice job. They like what he's doing up there, and he's selling, and he's real good. Then all of a sudden, they get a wrecking project in Savannah, Georgia. And Irving is already an assistant manager in Buffalo. And he's a member of the family. If he's a member of the family, you can trust him. He's okay. He's one of the boys now. So they move him down to Savannah, Georgia to live. And he goes to Savannah, Georgia, and he finds Mrs. Wiseman's rooming house. A Jewish woman had a rooming house in Savannah, Georgia. He moves my mother and me down there. So we lived in Savannah, Georgia for like 9 months. And he was selling lumber and stuff off the wrecking shop in Savannah, Georgia. Finishes the project. So they moved him back. I think they moved him to Buffalo and eventually moved him to Cleveland. And he's working in the wrecking yard in Cleveland. And a few years later is the 1939 World's Fair in Flushing, New York. And somehow the government, at the end of the World's Fair, had taken over the property, and they were going to keep certain buildings at the World's Fair were to remain, and there was going to be a park, and all the rest of the buildings had to be torn down. And they didn't want to give it to one wrecking contractor. They were afraid if they got somebody in there and they defaulted on the job, they'd really be up a creek. So they invited every big wrecking contractor in the country to bid on jobs, on tearing down buildings. And Uncle George goes up there and he wins the Missouri State Building and Tough and Eddie's Restaurant, 2 buildings. Okay, Irving, you're going to Buffalo to run the job. So Irving moves up to Buffalo into Flushing, Long Island in a multi-family house, two-family house. And this is 1940. And so I'm 2.5, 3 years old. I'm starting to walk and do whatever I can do. And upstairs of the house is living a Russian family who were all midgets. And they had appeared at the World's Fair. They did a routine or something, and they decided to stay. They wanted to stay in America. So they all stayed in this house, and all these midgets are living on the second floor. We're living on the first floor. My parents said that I would go out, I would see one of the midgets. Well, I was the same height as the midgets. So I wanted to play with them, and they didn't want to play with me. After all, this is a 35-year-old man with 3 kids. You don't want to play with a 2-year-old kid. And they said I was quite frustrated that these people wouldn't play with me. But I didn't know. And they sold stuff at Tough and Eddie's Restaurant. There was a lot of good restaurant equipment and so on that they sold to people. Took them into Manhattan and opened a new restaurant and whatever. And it was a very successful wrecking job. Now it's 1941, and back to Cleveland. Where do they put them? On 110th Street. So one of the tenants moved out, and Irving and Hilda and little Nathan move into the converted mansion on 110th Street. By this time, Irving is already an assistant manager, and they make him manager of the Cleveland operation. And he's in charge of everything they do around Cleveland. And they're quite pleased with him. And he liked the wrecking business. And he loved Uncle George. Uncle George was a very nice guy and really taught him the business. He was a very patient man, and he slowly taught him all the ins and outs of the business. And George became famous in the United States as one of the best managers of a wrecking company in the country. He served on government committees on demolition work. So it's 1941. What happens on December 7th, 1941? World War. And George's son, Leonard, who was the same age as my father, who was working with my father, gets drafted. He goes into the construction battalion of the Navy Seabees. And that leaves my father. And somebody in the family had a recording machine that they could make records. And they made a record for one of the cousins who was in the army in Africa or somewhere. And my father gets on there and he says, well, I guess one of these days they're going to draft me into this army. I guess I'm going to have to go. And I hope I get into some unit where I can use my talents in the wrecking business. But I'll be joining you guys pretty soon. Well, he never got called. Somehow, we don't know whether it was the wrecking business became a critical industry or what, but they used to save everything they could save in a wrecking job. And the biggest wrecking job they had, there were big ore docks up in northern Michigan, in Escanaba, Michigan. And they were bringing iron ore from the ranges up in Wisconsin and Minnesota up there and loading them on ore boats on Lake Superior, bringing them down to Cleveland, Lake Erie, and unloading the ore boats. And they had this big ore dock that they created with lumber that was lowered into the lake and driven in piling. And lumber is measured by length, by the size of the board, not necessarily the height of the board. And they were able to put a saw in there, and this thing was like 24 inches by 24 inches, and they were able to slice it, and they make it 2x12s, 2x14s, and so on. And they made lumber for building army camps. So it became a critical skill, and they would get a project of creating this lumber out of whatever they were wrecking for the government. And Irving was working at that. We never moved to Escanaba, thank goodness. We stayed in Cleveland, but he would commute up there. So World War II is over with, and we are living on 110th Street. Same old, big old mansion. And I have very vivid memories of that. Unfortunately, it's been torn down, but we live there.
Do you have any?
Would be pictures of the family sitting on the front porch. In other words, there was never a big picture of the whole place, just the family sitting on the front porch. Or there is a picture somewhere, and I think we could find it, of myself and one of the tenants on the second floor had two little girls, and we're standing in front of the house. I'm holding an American flag, wearing a helmet, and the girls are holding American flags and a little sign that says "Onward to Victory." So that's where I grew up.
Take a break from the career path and tell me what the atmosphere, what it was like living and growing up in that house.
Wonderful, as far as I knew.
Tell me about your parents and what it was like and what a normal day was like for you.
Well, I'll tell you what it was like. First of all, my mother tried to become pregnant several times. She wanted to have at least one or two more children, and she was unable to. And so she had an operation where she couldn't have children. So I never had any brothers or sisters. I do remember playing with the kids. There was the Martin family lived directly above us, and on the other side was the Lewis family, and they had kids. Downstairs was a Troy family. They were older. They were teenagers, the two girls there. Why did they live there on 110th Street? In the Glenville neighborhood. This was a Glenville neighborhood. It was all Gentile. Across the street from us was St. Aloysius Church, and they all belonged to the church. This was a church parish. So what was life like? The Troy sisters would babysit for me. My mother would go downtown shopping. They would babysit for me, and I remember this very well. Of course, I was already 10 years old. Well, I was 8 years old, 7 years old, and them taking me over to the church. And I remember these men walking around with long black dresses. That's what I thought. They were wearing long black dresses, and they were the priests. I remember a priest lifting me up, and now it's a joke, but it might well have happened. Listen, little Jew boy, you behave yourself, or you're going to wind up like the guy hanging on the wall over there.
Maybe they just baptized you.
Yeah, they wanted to baptize me. Well, the fact of the matter was, when Christmas time rolled around, they all had Christmas trees. And of course, Grandma Sog would not permit a Christmas tree in our house. And but all I had to do was walk across the hall. There was this beautiful Christmas tree with the trains running around it. And old man Troy would sit there and tell me about life during World War I and how it was in the Army. And all we thought about was the Army. I mean, we'd go out and play soldier boy. You'd go out in the woods and take your toy gun and you're shooting the soldiers. And I had a friend live down the street. His name was Pat Sands. And he used to come to my house to play, and I wanted to go to his house. And Pat used to say to me, "You can't come to my house because my parents are harboring Japanese in the basement." Although he didn't call them Japanese. I'll use the J word. And we have Japs in our house. And he says they're swinging from the rafters in the basement. And he says they're very dangerous people. So if we go to my house, they're liable to capture you and take you down there and kill you. So I don't want you to be anywhere near these Japanese. So we weren't allowed to play at his house. I had a deadly fear that there were real Japanese people down there. At the end of the street was a swimming pool, the Glenville Pool. And as I think back of it, it was dirty, filthy. There were parts of tree branches floating around on the water, and there was like a scum on the water. But it was a swimming pool, and it was a hot day, and we went swimming down there. They also had baseball diamonds. They had Little League down there. I didn't play Little League. We used to go down there and watch baseball games at night. We'd have dinner, and my mother would take me, and we'd walk down. We had little portable chairs, sit there and watch a baseball game. That was the way we spent our summers. And across the street, across St. Clair, across 110th Street, was a big gully. And they put this big sewer line in there to bring down the sewage from the Heights area. And that's still there. That's the way the sewage goes down to the lake. It goes right down 110th Street. Well, while they're building this thing, my God, what a place to play. And we used to play in it, play in the sewer. And they used to deliver coal. Now, you didn't have gas heat in those days, but I remember the coal truck coming, and they would drive up to our house, and it was a dump truck, and they would tilt the truck, and they had a chute, and this coal would run down into the basement, into a big coal chute. And there was nothing better than that coal chute full of coal and all this black dust circulating in the air. Oh, what a place to play.
You're a testament to playing in filth and
Yeah.
bacteria bolstered your immune system that you're...
I'm suffering from it now.
Oh, you are?
I have COPD.
From that, you believe?
No, actually, I think it came from the wrecking business.
Dust and debris.
Dust and debris. But it might have come from that.
Did they not shoot water when they were wrecking buildings like they do now? Like to keep out the dust?
No, hell no.
They just let it fly in the
Oh,
air?
they didn't have any safety features at all even.
Yeah.
So we're living there on 110th Street. And I'm going to Oliver Wendell Holmes Elementary School, which I loved. It was a very good school. We had departmentalized classes. In other words, we went in the morning, you went to homeroom, and then they rang a bell, and you went to your first class, which was across the hall, mathematics. Then they rang a bell, and then you went up to geography, which was up on the second floor. And you had different teacher for each subject, which was something unheard of in a lot of places. Cleveland school system, at that time, we're talking about starting school in 1943, 1944. Starting school at that time was one of the best school systems in the country. It was really very advanced and very, very good. And my parents decided I should have a Jewish education. Well, my mother wanted to join the Euclid Avenue Temple, which is where she was raised. But it was reform. And the family says, no, not reform. So she had to join a synagogue where we had relatives. And we had some relatives that belonged to it was called the Temple on the Heights Temple. And one of the advantages to Heights Temple was there was a bus line that stopped, had a bus stop at 110th and St. Clair, and it went up 110th Street, became Lakeview. Lakeview went up to Superior. Superior went up Superior Hill to Mayfield, went around to Mayfield and Lee and out Lee Road. So when I started Sunday school, it was during the war, and my father didn't want to drive me because it was using gasoline, and gasoline was rationed. And he didn't want to use gasoline to take me to Sunday school. So they could put me on a bus and tell the bus driver, leave him off at, I was 5 years old, leave him off at Mayfield and Superior. And I went to Sunday school. Part of the Cohn family, which is my grandmother's family, who were Hungarians, belonged there to the Heights Temple. And my parents hated it. They would go there on the high holidays. Neither parents spoke Hebrew, read Hebrew. My father was not bar mitzvahed. My mother went to Sunday school, and that was all. And no real Jewish training other than family events. Now on the high holidays and Jewish New Year, we would get together with the family, and you would have the traditional things, the apples and honey and stuff like that, or we'd light Hanukkah candles, but it was all around the family. And that our total religion was within the family. We didn't have, I remember them taking me to a synagogue once or twice, my great-grandparents. Now, up on Lakeview lived my grandmother, Anna Cohn Sog, her parents, who were my great-grandparents. They were living on Tuscarora. And my great-grandfather used to love to play checkers with me. I would go and sit with I called him Grandpa Cohn. Referred to all of my grandparents by their last names. Never would call any of them Zadie. I never called any of them Grandpa Louie or Grandpa Joe or anything. It was Grandpa Cohn, Grandma Sog, Grandma Arnold, and Grandpa Arnold. That was it. That was the way it was. So Grandpa Cohn and I used to sit and play checkers. And he was an old man with glasses. And he was about 90 years old. He would shake a little bit. We played checkers. And it was fun to go there and to be with my great-grandfather. And they had a number of children in the family who became what was called old maids. There were 3 women and 1 man that never got married, or they got married very late in life. When they were 50 years old, they got married for a while. But so they were all living at that house on Tuscarora, and they would all take care of me. And I was the prince of the family. I was the heir apparent to everything. And the Sog family took care of me very nicely. And my Aunt Shirley and Uncle Maury were 2 of the most marvelous people in the world. My Uncle Maury had 2 daughters, Nancy and Peggy, and no sons, and he wanted a son. And I was his pseudo-son, and he treated me like a son. And he was wonderful to me. So a lot of my family life was a big part of what I did. I was really into the family. It seemed to be a part of me. And so my mother heard about something new had started called Camp Wise. And it was a Jewish Community Federation's camp out in Painesville. So she says, would you like to go to camp? Oh, yeah. So I went to Camp Wise from when I was 8 years old till just before my bar mitzvah, till I was 12. It seems like it was longer than that. One year I went 2 times. They called them trips, 2-week trips. I loved Camp Wise. Now, what was going on in 1948 when I'm in Camp Wise? The founding of the State of Israel. So, it was at Camp Wise that we used to dance around doing the hora, and we would play soldiers, and we were the Haganah and the Irgun, and we would go into the forest and try to seek out Arabs, and it was very Jewish related. Of course, it was all kosher, and it was a big part of my life, and I enjoyed going to camp. And So I
Any
did.
friends there that you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Who were your best friends then?
Well, I don't remember any specifically, but some showed up at various parts of my life. I remember one kid was in my cabin when I was like 8 years old, and he eventually wound up in my AZA group years later. There's a man living in my apartment building right now who was a friend of mine from camp, and we haven't seen each other in 60 years, and I keep seeing him in the hallway and on the elevator. I said, Donnie, we got to get together and talk about old times. He says, I'm ready anytime you are. Been here 2 years, and I haven't gotten together with him yet. But he was an old friend that way. But I did have several friends that came back to Cleveland, and we remained friends at home. And now, about the same time I was going to Camp Wise, I came home from camp, and, well, my mother said to me, she says, we went to a PNTA meeting at the school. There was a black family there. So we're moving. No other reason. We're moving. You're not going to go to school with. She didn't call them black. She called them the Yiddish name for blacks. And so we're going to move. Well, I don't know if I want to move. I have friends there. Well, we don't care what you think. We're moving. So I came home from camp, and my parents picked me up at the bus stop from camp. They took me right out to Cleveland Heights. They had put a deposit down on a house, a brand new house. I was 10 years old, and they put down a deposit on a brand new house on Revere Road in Cleveland Heights. Oh my God, was that beautiful. Oh, this wonderful house. I said, where's the other tenants? No other tenants. You have nobody else. Just us are going to live in this house. Wow. And it had a big backyard, and I felt like I had died and gone to heaven. Now, and I'm going to have my own bedroom. Well, turns out that previously when we lived on 110th Street, we lived in a one-bedroom house, a one-bedroom apartment, rather. So every night I would go to sleep in my parents' bed. They would take me into their bed, and I'd go to sleep. Wake up in the morning, I was in the dining room. They had a bed in the dining room that fell out of the wall. You opened a door, it's called an in-a-door bed. You opened the door, and the bed came down, and they would put me in the bed. But I would be asleep. They would sleepwalk me in there, put me in the bed. I was going to have my own bedroom, my own private room. Oh, my God. And I started meeting kids in the neighborhood, and I made some nice friends. And it was very much of a dividing line. Cedar Road was the dividing line. We lived, I guess, north of Cedar, and that was Cleveland Heights. And I went to Taylor School. I was put in Taylor School. On the other side of the road was University Heights, and those kids went to Fairfax School. So my friends were all on the one side of Cedar, all on the Cleveland Heights side. And we moved. So I was in the fourth grade, and fourth or fifth grade, and we move up. We're in the house. And my mother takes me up to Taylor Road School, and we fill out the papers and so on. Now I'm a student at Taylor Road School, where we had one teacher the whole day. You walked in, she was your teacher. She took the roll. She taught mathematics. She got through. She closed her book, took out the geography book. She taught geography, closed that book, taught art, closed that book, and we did gym. It was way behind the Cleveland schools. And what they were studying, I had 2 years ago. I was very bored. Well, the first thing is, I remember walking in the classroom, a couple boys turned around, where are you from? Well, I went to Oliver Wendell Holmes. Oh, you were in the city? You're a city kid? Yeah, guess I am. Oh, do you know how to fight? Well, yeah, one time I got in a fight at school, but I wasn't much of a fighter. Well, we got to see what kind of fighter you are. Took me out to Taylor School and picked a fight with me. I didn't know how to fight. So they beat me up. I went back crying into the classroom. Well, so the next time, a little punch you here and there. And I wasn't very happy there. I had a few friends in the class, and we got along okay. But there were a few guys that I just didn't like. They didn't like me. I didn't like them, and I was considered one of the city kids. If you were a city kid, you had to be either rough and tough, because if you came out of the city, you were a tough kid. In 1 year, all of my friends, my Cub Scout group in the city, all of them moved to Cleveland Heights en masse. And the whole neighborhood down there became all black in 1 year. So I had a few friends that came up from the city that I was friends with. And so I got along. I'm going to school there. And getting ready for junior high school. So I'm going to go to Roosevelt Junior High School. And they came along one day and they said, we're building a new school in University Heights. It's going to be called Wiley Junior High School. And Roosevelt is just packed to the gills. And we're going to take this certain neighborhood. They showed us on a map, certain neighborhood. My neighborhood was included. And all my friends, they're going to Roosevelt. I have to go to this other school, Monticello. Monticello School was located on the other side of Cleveland Heights. There's no way you could walk to Monticello. I could ride a bike. It was about a 20-minute bike ride, or they put in a bus. So I did my junior high school at Monticello, which was a unique experience in itself, because the Monticello neighborhood, that neighborhood was all Gentile. There were no Jews that lived in that area. And so we had a minimum amount of Jewish kids. And some of my friends were going to Roosevelt. And there was another, I think it was Roxborough was the other junior high school. Some went to Roxborough. And it was somewhere in that period of time that I belonged to the Cub Scouts. And the Cub Scout group in Cleveland, in the city, was all Jewish, an all Jewish Cub Scout group. And likewise, we moved on the Heights, they were all Jewish. So I hung around with some Jewish kids there. But my best friend lived around the corner from me, and he was Catholic. His name was Clive Nagy. And Clive was about a year older than me. I think he delivered papers on our street, and he got me a paper route. And must have started the paper route when I was in junior high school, and I had it all the way up until I was 16 years old. I always had a paper route. It was either the Cleveland Press or the Cleveland Plain Dealer. I was delivering papers and collecting money on it. And Clive and I were talking it was a summer day. We weren't doing much of anything. My mother used to tell me, go out and earn some money. Go out and earn some money. What do you want me to do, Mother? Well, we'll mow lawns. Take a lawnmower and cut grass. So I did. I took the lawnmower and went down the street and rapped on doors, and I get $1 and I cut the front and back grass, rake it up. And we wanted to do something worthwhile. And I don't know how we got to it. It may have been Clive that suggested it, but somehow we decided, let's raise money for polio. They had a polio campaign. And let's do something to raise money. Well, how are we going to raise money? Let's have a carnival. And I had a big backyard. And we figured we could go out and we could get some orange crates, some other things, and make little stands. And we'd have games. And we'd charge 10 cents to come into the carnival. And they would buy tickets for 5 cents a piece. We were able to get tickets, and we went to a print shop, and he printed up some flyers for us. Polio Benefit Carnival. And we were going to do this. It would be a one-day deal. And somehow there was a radio station at Cedar and Lee called WSRS, and they had a program there, a little 5-minute program, was called People Worth Knowing. And I get a phone call from a lady, Mrs. Koblitz. She says, I heard about your carnival that you're having. I would like to interview you for our radio program. Oh, sure. So she came over and interviewed Clive and I in the living room of our house, wrote up a script, and it was on the air. And I don't know whatever happened to the script, but we were selected as people worth knowing in Cleveland Heights. And
How old were you at this time?
10 or 11.
And this is before, obviously, Ronald McDonald charity.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Long before.
Yeah, they weren't doing anything like that.
Yeah.
Nobody was doing that.
10 or 11, and you're on the radio.
We were on the radio talking about this.
Did this explode the carnival so that there were 1 million people at your door?
No, but a lot of people came. And the newspaper picked it up. The Sun Press picked it up when we were on the front page of the Sun Press with a picture of us having the carnival. So we had all these different games there. We set it up, and we raised $110. To raise $110 at nickel and dime stuff, we thought was pretty big. And we went down to the Polio Association, and they gave us a letter appreciation that we had raised $100, give it all to polio. And that was the first time I had ever done anything charitable or anything like that. And it was Clive and I that planned it out. We had all our friends involved in it. And what we did was, the following year, we had another carnival. This time we had it in University Heights. And we found an empty lot. We went to the city of University Heights, and it had weeds growing in the lot. And we went to the service department, and we said we wanted to have this benefit carnival to raise money for polio. Would you have your people cut down the grass? And they did. And they trimmed this whole lot, and we set up our stuff there. I think that time we raised $200. And again, we were in the front page of the Sun Press as a charitable event. And if you can imagine this, there were some kids that came to the carnival, and we had a little thing where you set 3 cans on a table, and you took a hardball and you threw it, and if you knocked over the cans, you got a little prize. They came along, and they got the 3 hardballs, and they went and they threw them into the next yard. Busted it up. They were jealous of us. They wanted to bust it up. And I remember all the fathers were there. They got these kids, they threw them all out of there. But that was the type of kids that lived in University Heights in that area. They were jealous of us having this carnival, raising money. That was a nasty experience.
But it didn't sour you on it. It didn't.
Well,
you never want to do it again.
And that was it. It did sour us on it, but we did raise the money, and we felt good that we were doing some good for people. And it was about that time, then I had my bar mitzvah. And just before my bar mitzvah, my grandmother used to have a record player down in her basement there, and she was trying to teach me how to dance. She said, well, you'll be 13 years old. You start going out with girls, you have to know how to dance. So I would take dancing lessons from my grandmother and step on her toes all the time. And she got real angry. She said, I'm going to get you into dancing school. And there was something called Florence Shapiro School of the Dance. It was at Mayfield and Superior. And they had dancing classes on Saturday night and Friday night. Friday night classes, you had to belong to the Oakwood or Beachmont Country Club in order to take dancing lessons on Friday night. They called it Oakwood night, but it was Oakwood and Beachmont did it that night. Saturday night was anybody, you had to be Jewish. And so my grandmother got me a scholarship to this place where we met girls, and we had to walk in. They had the Grand March, I remember. You used to walk in. The girls would be out in the reception room there. The boys would go up and find a girl, and it had a different girl each week. And you would walk in to this big room, and that's how I started meeting girls.
Like a debutante ball.
It was like a debutante ball, and we didn't learn the jitterbug, but they called it the shag, but it was a jitterbug. But and there was something new called the mambo, and they didn't want to do that. But I met some very nice girls and started dating about the time of my bar mitzvah, although I did not invite any girls to my bar mitzvah. Now, my father was manager at Cuyahoga Wrecking Company at the time and was making a living. They didn't particularly pay him well. He was very low paid. But we were living on 110th Street, then living on Revere Road. And I want to make a point with this. Now I can't think of what.
Hang on, let me take a break here.
Yeah.
Do you need some? Okay.
Okay, so my parents have a bar mitzvah for me at the Temple on the Heights, and they decide to have a reception at the Alcazar Hotel, which is near Cedar and Fairmont. It's still there today. It's a residential hotel. But they get for a reception. They get this room for a reception. And my father's got a little bit of a problem. He doesn't have enough money to pay for the reception. So we have the bar mitzvah, and 2 great-grandmothers are still alive at the bar mitzvah, but could not come to it. My great-grandfather had died, and Grandpa Cohn died. I was out at Camp Wise when he died. But Grandma Cohn was still alive, and Grandma Sog was living in Florida. She was living at the Clevelander Hotel in Miami Beach, Florida, which was owned by the Ratner family. The Ratner family were cousins. So she lived by cousins at the Clevelander Hotel, which today you're going to pay $500 a night minimum to stay at the Clevelander Hotel. It's an Art Deco hotel right on Miami Beach. But that's where she lived. So she couldn't come up for the bar mitzvah. And Grandma Cohn would not come to the bar mitzvah because it was on Saturday morning. It was Shabbos, and she couldn't drive on Shabbos. So we had the bar mitzvah. We got through with the bar mitzvah ceremony, had a little bite to eat, and we drove down to the city. And I brought my bar mitzvah papers with the speech and everything, and I did the whole thing on Tuscarora at my great-grandmother's house. And she sat there the whole time, oh, it's wonderful, it's wonderful. And I did my whole bar mitzvah for my great-grandmother, which was a special thing for me. But now, that night, we had this reception for mostly my parents' friends and cousins. I had a few friends. Clive Nagy was there. I remember he came. He came with his parents, and they got there. It was 8 to 12 was the reception, and the Nagys were there at 8 o'clock, right on time. And my mother says, "Yeah, it figures they would come early." Anyway, the end of the evening, there was the guy that Mater D comes, and they have a bill. My father doesn't have enough money to pay the bill. So we go and we take out all the checks, and we took I don't know, $500, $1,000 out of my bar mitzvah money to pay for the hall. So I didn't know any different. My father says to me, he says, "I promise you, I will pay you back. I don't have the money." So we did. He paid for the bar mitzvah. So it comes back to haunt us later. Okay, so we have the bar mitzvah, and I have Florence Shapiro School of the Dance. And I had a speech impediment. I talk just like this through my nose. I had what was called adenoids in the back of my nose, and I talk like this. And they removed them, and I still had a little bit of a speech impediment like this. So my mother wanted me to learn to speak distinctly. So one of the places to do that was the Cleveland Playhouse offered Saturday morning curtain pullers. And that was the youth theater. You could go there and you would learn how to speak. She heard that people had gone there and they learned to speak, to project their voices. And I remember it was Harriet Brazier was the head of it, and I went there and you had to breathe from the diaphragm. What the hell was a diaphragm? I don't know. But you breathe from the diaphragm to project your voice out. And that was to improve my voice. And in 1947, I believe it was 47 or 48, I think it was 47, 1947, I'm a curtain puller, and they have something new in Cleveland called television. And they had WEWS Channel 5 was on the air, and it's December. Well, actually, this was in September or October, but in December, we're going to have Santa Claus coming from the North Pole. And Santa has to have elves. So we need a bunch of boys to come there and be elves with Santa Claus. So they lined up the boys, and I remember them saying, well, Arnold, Nathan over there, he's too tall. Will he be too tall? And I remember the director saying, no, he'll be all right. He'll be all right. So I was selected to be one of the elves, and they had 3 elves every night, 3 different elves every night. So I was on the Saturday night crew with 2 guys, and they had costumes for us. We dressed up as elves with feather in the hat and tights and stuff. And it was an ad-lib type of thing. Paul Hodges was the Santa Claus. And so we were on TV. I was on TV as an elf on Santa Claus. And the third Saturday night, they wanted us to sing a Christmas carol. And so they printed up a sheet with all the words to one of the Christmas carols. I can't think of it, which one it was. And we had to learn the Christmas carol. Well, all the kids, the other 2, they knew it, but I didn't. And they said, we're going to play a record. We'll play the record, and all you have to do is learn the first chorus. And you stand there and move your lips like you're singing, and we'll play the record, and that'll be you singing. So I go there, and all Saturday afternoon, I'm studying this thing. This one Christmas carol. It's a popular Christmas carol, but I didn't know it. And we get on there, and we're singing, and Santa Claus is in there. Come on, boys, sing, sing. I'm moving my lips, and the guy is supposed to stop the record at the end of the first chorus. He's supposed to lift up the record. Forgets. Goes into the second chorus. Now, the second chorus, I don't know at all. I'm moving my lips like this, huh? And I got through it, and they told me I did very well. But that's how I was a real schlub on television. My Aunt Shirley and Uncle Maury had a television set. My grandmother's living with them, so they saw me on TV. Television used to go on at that time, 6 o'clock at night. The station went on the air and went off the air at 10 o'clock, and they showed movies. That was the extent of television in Cleveland. Now, I have to do something. It's summertime, about 1950. It's summertime, and I got to make more money than just delivering papers and cutting lawns. So my father says, I tell you what, I'm going to take you down to the Cuyahoga. I'm going to teach you the business. Okay. So every morning I would get up and go with my father. We'd drive down to the wrecking yard, and I was wearing old clothes, and they gave me these big gloves, war gloves, and I was handling lumber, pulling out nails. Oh, it was hotter than hell. It was a real hot summer. I remember one day about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I was perspiring like you wouldn't believe it. My clothes are soaking wet, and we're throwing around this lumber. Finally, we'd take a break, and I'd run up to the front office, and I'd go up into my father's office. And in those days, you didn't have whole building air conditioning. They had a window air conditioner. So he had his window air conditioner on. I walked into my father's office. It was 90 degrees outside, 70 degrees in my father's office. I walked in. I sat down in a chair in front of him. I go, just like that. And my father looks across the hall, across his desk. I'll never forget this. He looks across his desk. He says, what in the hell are you doing in here? I said, Dad, I came in to cool off. I'm not paying you to cool off. Get your rear end back out. And he kicked me out of the office. I'll never forget that. I had to go back out there, and it was terrible. And we were living on Revere Road. But Now we had a few wrecking jobs in Cleveland, and I would go out to some of the wrecking jobs, and I was 15 years old. We had this big truck that we delivered lumber on, and I used to love to go with the driver of the truck, and I would shift the gears, and you had a gear shift on the floor. And I learned to shift the gears while they put in the clutch. And then I took the truck, I learned to drive it in the yard, and I set up 2 poles. I learned to park this 2.5-ton truck, pull it in, and park it perfectly. But I couldn't drive. I was 15 years old. I couldn't drive. So I'm 16 years old, and on my 16th birthday, I go to the license bureau, and I pick up the booklet that gives the written test, and I sign up to take the practical test. I go back in the afternoon. I take the written test, and I got 100 on the written test. Perfect. Now I get in a car, and of course, getting into my father's Chevrolet with Power Glide, automatic transmission, was like nothing after driving this big truck. And I zip out and go around the block with a cop and come back, and I pull in the perfect parking. By the numbers. And I remember this cop going over saying to my father, he's only 16 years and 1 day old, or he's 16 years today. I can't give him a driver's license 1 day. He obviously didn't have a temporary or anything. He says, I can't give him a license. My father says, well, do what you have to do. And then, well, come back next week. So I did. I came back the following week, and I took the test, passed it, and they gave me my driver's license. So I was 16 years and 1 week old. And, of course, what's 1 week from my birthday? New Year's Eve. So I get a New Year's Eve, get to go to a New Year's Eve party or whatever, and I get a date. I said to my father, I want to drive New Year's. He says, oh, I think that's fine. No problem. You can drive the car. Tell your girlfriend we will pick her up. I said, what do you mean we? He says, well, I'm going to sit in the back seat because I don't trust you to drive. So I will sit in the back seat while you drive. I says, Dad, no. Yes, I'm not. He says, the state may think you're a good driver, but I don't think you're so good, so you're not taking my car. So I said, well, then I'm not. I'll go with somebody else. And I did. I went with somebody else. My father was very, very dominant person. You do it my way or else. And, by the numbers. He was very strict with me, where my mother was more liberal. She gave in to me more. She was if I wanted something out of my parents, I went to my mother, and never got it from my father. But
was he an emotional guy? Could you get a sense of what was emotionally important to him?
No, he was. He harbored resentments to my mother's family for treating him the way they did in the wrecking business.
Like a ditch digger.
They treated him very shabbily. Even though he was a relative, they didn't do for him what they did for some of the other relatives. And he was very resentful of them, and he took it out on me. He must have looked at me, the way I figured, he must have looked at me and he saw that I was a sog. I was part of my mother's family. I was part of whatever that mystique was of these people that owned this business for years, and we were just the common people. And I remember them literally looking down their nose at him. We had bought the house on Revere Road, and my father took my Uncle George over to see the house, wanted to show him the house. And Uncle George says, very good house. I can get you a deal on linoleum for your living room. My father says, what? Put linoleum in the kitchen? No, you put linoleum, you shouldn't have carpeting. You can't afford carpeting. Well, my father was kind of proud of the fact that he was moving to a nice house. He wanted everything to be part of the deal. He wanted, you go down to the discount furniture store or the used furniture store. We'll buy you some used furniture and you'll furnish the house. That was the way they would talk to him.
So he had a chip on his shoulder, and he wanted to prove
right.
He wanted to prove himself, so he was angry and
right
and bitter.
He was a bit bitter.
Dominated his personality at that point.
Oh yeah.
Up until that point, though, where you didn't know him before then, but
No, he was still,
you think it was early on from his parents?
yeah, he would come home from work and sit down for dinner, and everything was about my uncle. Goddamn George made me do this, and goddamn George made me do that. And I should have gotten a bonus for this. I should have gotten this, and I should have gotten that, and I didn't get this. I didn't get that. It was like, but
Didn't you say earlier George was a great guy and became? And
yes, he
he
was,
was a good guy, but
as far as I was concerned.
Yeah.
But when you got down to the Cuyahoga Wrecking Company, at that point, he was the Lord Master of the place. Well, he was fighting his mother. His mother was running the company, and he had all these relatives that he had to take care of. He felt it was an obligation that he had to hire all the relatives. But he was a wonderful guy. But to me, he was very nice.